A very good day to all our guests, our co-conference delegates. A very warm welcome to you all to this session of IFAMA for the Africa-Europe region. The topic that we will be addressing is new investments in agri-food systems that usher in next frontier. There are many aspects to food systems across Africa, across Europe, and it's a very diverse subject. And we have some excellent panelists that we will introduce to you, and they will participate. And we'll also have a questions and answer session. You can also raise your questions during the Q&A session. There is a special column for that. But firstly, and I want to also introduce my co-moderator. He's actually my colleague, Wandile Sishlobo, very well known in South Africa and in Africa. Wandile is my chief economist within the Agricultural Business Chamber, but he is very widely recognized for his exceptional expertise. He serves on the Presidential Economic Advisory Council of President Ramaphosa. He serves on the International Trade and Administration Commission. He serves on Stats SA Council, so recognized highly and in South Africa and across Africa, advising many ministers, etc. So Wandile, welcome, and thank you for assisting us with the moderation. Then I want to introduce the subject and say that food systems across Africa and across Europe differ widely. Even in Africa, they differ widely. And they have evolved over time, depending on legislation aspects, depending on consumer trends, depending on how value chains are structured. So there are many aspects to the value chains across Europe and across Africa. And I think we have to be mindful of that. We have to understand that the food business is a private sector business. It's driven by entrepreneurship, by private enterprise. It creates a lot of opportunity from small growers, small business, SMMEs, right through to big business. And the question is, how are these food systems evolving? How are they changing? What role is private equity going to play? For example, in the new frontiers of investment. And we've just seen a report that Woody sent to me that private equity have made an aggressive bid for Morrisons, the fourth largest retailer in the UK, for example. Now we're going to see more private equity. What about concentration in the food systems and competition legislation, antitrust legislation that controls this? What about the United Nations Food System Summit and the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals? How do they impact on our food systems? What is going to emanate from the United Nations Food Systems Summit? The issue of family farms, are they disappearing? What role do they still have to play in agriculture? Also, globalized value chains. How in the COVID times, when we have all the disruptions in supply chains, how globalized are we going to make our value chains? The power of the supermarkets is still phenomenal. And how do we manage the power of the supermarkets? Is it a added benefit to the food system, or is it constraining competition and access to the industry? Cost of capital and capital availability and the attractiveness of investment for capital. Nico, we also want you to speak a little bit from the banking side on the financing situation, and also from China, the investments that China are making in agriculture in Africa, for example. Issues of food inflation. We're certainly seeing food inflation spiking. How does that impact on investment going forward? And then, of course, the technology companies, high tech, genetic engineering, biotechnology, etc., is where a lot of investment is taking place. And last but not least, also the land issue. And Wat is going to talk to us on the land issue, because that's also an investment aspect and very necessary for agriculture. So these are just some of the things, of the issues that I think should come up in these new frontiers, new investment frontiers, as food systems evolve all over the world, and how we participate, how we make them inclusive, but also how we make them efficient to ensure that we have food security for the global population going forward, especially in Africa, where there is huge food insecurity. Population in Africa is just over 1 billion people now. It doubles to 2 billion by 2050. That's 30 odd years from now, and then doubles again to 4 billion people by 2100. So that's a huge, either risk or a huge opportunity for food systems. And we need to engage on that as well. Europe leads so much on the technology and the sustainability issues, and obviously we have to interrogate these and see what we can learn from European food systems as we go forward. And then there's the issue of trade, of African trade with Europe, and what will Farm to Fork and what will the new Green Deal or the Green New Deal do to trade with Africa, for example, because it's a very important destination for African produce. All these are aspects that impact on the new food systems. I want to give my co-moderator, Wandile, just a chance to also highlight some aspects or issues that he feels we should be looking at in our discussion. Wandile?
Good afternoon, everyone on the call, and thank you, John. I'm really, John, thinking that our panel is meeting at an opportune time, because the African continent is not only looking at agriculture in as far as revitalizing the food systems, but it's also the question of, say, as we come out of the pandemic, the economies are looking at agriculture to say what role can it play to revive or to boost growth and job opportunities. What can agriculture then do in that space, and what sort of policies that needs to be in place for investments to flow in the sector, which colleagues like Russell, who are on the call, will be able to illuminate some ideas onto that role. So really an exciting afternoon. And I think that, John, we could kick the ball now rolling with Nico to open for us. Nico is with Standard Bank Group, operating across the African continent. He's the head of agriculture there. And Nico, we will leave the ball with you as one of the opening panels.
Thank you, Wandile. Thank you, John. John, in your opening remarks, you mentioned a couple of words. You mentioned, amongst other, China, and you mentioned funding systems where we as a bank play. And you also referred to equity firms specifically having an interest and a potential role that they can play. Now, I often look at what Valero advisors, they are a bunch there of advisors in Brazil, look at that, because they track about 600 investment funds that specialize mainly in food and the agricultural sector. Now, what is interesting when you look at what they're tracking, when they look at it over a period of time, and these firms were something like 41 firms in 2005, and they're currently sitting at over 600 firms that invest in specifically in agriculture, and they mention a number of about $102 billion that's under management with them. So obviously, there's quite an interest from that part of the investment world in specifically agriculture. You can argue, if I recall correctly, I think that of that there's only about 4% in Africa, but when there's investment bodies that's interested in agriculture, it surely has an impact because of the interconnectivity of the value chains that exist also back into Africa. You also mentioned something about China, John, and what is interesting, Valero specifically made note of the fact, or they argue that the catalyst for this growth in terms of equity investment or funds that's investing in agriculture since the early 2000s was at the back of the emergence of China as a major food importer that drove prices in agricultural commodities higher at that stage, and then that continued with the trajectory of growth from an investment perspective. Currently, there's also comments that's been made that agriculture is in the so-called super cycle, and again, it is at the back of China's needs, specifically for maize, soya, beef, pork, and poultry. You can argue that there's a different school of thought that might argue that the so-called financialization of agriculture does not necessarily benefit, the people on the ground. But I don't think today's discussion is to determine whether or not the investment funds playing a role in agriculture is good or bad. I think what it does highlight for me specifically is that there's a real interest from the investment community across the globe in specifically agriculture. And as I say, I do think that it finds its roots also back then into South Africa and then Africa as the continent. Now, going back to China, that's the underlying growth catalyst is they started in the 1990s with their going out or go global strategy, which was an initiative to strengthen the Chinese company by encouraging them to move out from their home base and into global markets. And these Chinese companies are increasing their investments in foreign and agricultural food and assets, and the USDA also confirms that in the study that they did. Their broad aims is to gain profits for those Chinese investors while achieving national food security and projecting China's influence abroad. Now, one might think that the United States is obviously at this stage still China's biggest supplier of Chinese import, but it's not been the major target of Chinese investment. Chinese investors tend to enter into countries where there are fewer competitors and potential to raise productivity using Chinese technology, and a potential to diversify suppliers of Chinese imports. What is, however, still fact, and it was also, I think it was Jiaotong University, still mentions that 58% of the export from Africa into China is in the form of primary minerals, which is not necessarily in the agri space. And but if you look at what the Chinese National Bureau of Statistics says, that their foreign investment in farming and forestry and fishing has grew fivefold in the period between 2010 and 2016. So there's definitely a focus on agriculture in Africa and in South Africa as well. If you look at the top destination for Chinese FDI at the moment, South Africa is at the top of the list. And maybe I must point out here that one of the biggest investments from China to date into Africa was a stake of 20% that they bought into my employer, Standard Bank, in 2007, 2008, to the value of about $5.6 billion at that stage. But just to get back to agriculture, China buys more than 75% of Africa's timber that goes to China. In South Africa, however, we have seen some changes and focus on other areas. Just last month, an organization by the name of Hortgrow here in South Africa, which looks after the horticultural industries in South Africa, had a promotion of apples in China. And for the 2020-2021 year to date, they already exported something like 7,200 tons, which is a 107% increase year on year, which is quite significant. The table grape guys in South Africa, similar story. They went to Guangzhou in April in China, and at that stage they exported already 1.8 million cartons to mainland China, and that was a 58% increase. That industry wants to grow up to 10 million cartons within the next 5 years. So there's definitely, from a export destination, a huge opportunity for agriculture. And then specifically in the African context, what is likely to drive and shape the future of investments? Definitely, no doubt, climate and environment, and I think a balance needs to be found between, and this is a dangerous word, so-called industrialization of agriculture, because one needs to balance that with the smallholder farms, and we can talk about that a bit later, but also agriculture being the custodian of natural resources. An example of that is the Chinese Africa Forest Governance learning platform that makes sure that those two poles are balanced. Then obviously technology and the management thereof. We in Standard Bank are busy with experiencing in terms of technology and specifically platforms using data to enhance what we're doing, not just from a bank service perspective, but also from a lending point of view, and we can also perhaps touch on that later. And then obviously value chain. which I think is quite important, and which go in the African context, which is quite important, that goes along with value chain, is corresponding infrastructure, and somebody might touch on that later as well. Just focusing on the raw product will probably have its limitations, and you need to understand storage and logistics in the African context, and packaging, and as well as processing in the early stage. Then lastly, John, just quickly, I think what is also quite important, which we will see going forward, is partnerships, JVs, not just between private companies, but also between public institutions and then private companies, which is critical. Just yesterday, I saw that the citrus industry in South Africa added another change to their protocols with our export to China. And that is critical, that those kind of partnerships is cemented, so that industry and government can contribute to make sure that we can realize the opportunities that sit specifically in China. And that, John Wandile, in a nutshell, is my quick intro. We can definitely chat on some of the stuff going forward.
Great, Nico. Thanks very much. There's a couple of aspects that we will touch on just now. Russell, I'm going to introduce you. Russell de Pre is a founder and the Chief Investment Officer of Russell Stone Group. He has hands-on experience of investing in food systems and value chain. And Russell, your experience and what you think are the critical issues going forward?
I think it's a mouthful. I mean, there's so many different sectors that's playing around. I mean, we from avocados in Australia to olive oil in South Africa, or olives in South Africa. We're growing pigs, pork in South Africa, and investigating lamb in the USA. And then we do trade a lot of grains and oilseeds, and we do downstream manufacturing, especially on soya meal. We're still one of the biggest soybean crushing plants in South Africa. And so I think, first of all, if we have to look at money coming all over the place into Africa, I don't see a lot coming. And I do think that might be a different story for the future, because, I mean, there's not really appetite out of a rand point of view. We saw going up the big funds exiting South Africa. But, I mean, this agriculture is the foundation of a society, and it's always been a migration process for any society, whereby you start out as an extensive farming operation, and then you end up in intensive farming. And you will only go on this migration if there's a long-term time frame where your money will be safe. I mean, if you take today on timber, if you planted timber in Knysna or the Western Cape side, you had a fire, and you're screwed. So I think agriculture needs a safe environment. The rules of the game should be fine. For instance, we went into Zimbabwe in the first time, 2007, 8. After the dollarization, we thought that, okay, the balance sheets are clean, and then we basically realized it was not so great. There were some other limitations, and then we got back again in 2012, and the rules was 1-to-1, and one morning there was bond notes, and 2 years later, it's 130 against 1. So currencies, you can't get your money out. The rules of the game change midway. So I would rather put my money in the USA and in Australia, or in certain industries where it's an export base, under the radar industry. So in my opinion, agriculture is the place to be. It's a technology play. It's a play on a derivative of technology. If you take the two lines and you say technology is almost a straight line, if you take corn in the USA in 1900, it was 48 bushels per acre. And today it's 185. I can tell you it's going to 230, 250 due to technology. And that would give you a discount cash flow on the land. So it's a sure thing. Well, it depends on what the goals are. I mean, like you said, the other big thing, and Peter Drucker said it well in 1950 already, people do not realize what is demographics. Africa, I cannot talk about Europe, I cannot talk about first world countries. I would rather go and invest there because the rules of the game are there, stable. But Africa has got a long way to climb still in agriculture, and you need the migration, you need extensive farming, you need the migration farming, and you need the intensive farming, and that is infrastructure building. You can look it back into Mesopotamia. There was waterways and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's a history thing. From my point of view, there's no other better industry to invest in for the next 50 years. Until population growth tapers off. Technology is going to drive the margins. You just need to be adaptive. And I mean, with the pork side, it's a no-brainer. We get 27. We know Dan, we've got a genetic company, Dan Bread. We represent them in South Africa out of Denmark. And we know we're going to 33 piglets per sow per year. You've got tomorrow, newspaper today. The technology in the houses will be amazing. I mean, I think COVID helped us on recognizing temperature and the control of your environment. And if you can control that, absolutely. And obviously climate change is another issue that we need to look at. And the bad reputation that we as agriculturists get irritates the shit out of me. Sorry for that. But actually, it's a long-term investment profile, long-term, very long, and you need all the support you can get from almost what I can call a commitment between people living in a city and a social contract between people in a city and people providing food. And somewhere along the line, that is the biggest challenge for the future. We need to bridge it, and we are very responsible on our own interest. It's always, we only got 60 crops left in the world. Am I so stupid not to look after my own soil? It would be stupid if I do that. But the consumer doesn't want to pay the organic as well. So what we call biologic, or what ZZ2 called is nature farming, or I mean, we're not stupid in agriculture. I hope, I do apologize for the bad language.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Russell. We're definitely going to engage you with a couple of questions just now. It's also a privilege for me to introduce Vart Ansu. Vart, we know well for many years. Vart, good to see you again. Vart is with the Agricultural Research Center for International Development. He was based in South Africa for a while, but back in France, I presume. Vart, the floor is yours. So we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. And good to see the old faces again. I'm based in Italy, actually. I'm based at the International Land Coalition and IFAD, the International Fund for Agriculture Development. But still working on the same issues. And now these issues are land. So we're talking about agriculture here, but I will be focusing on land and the primary production all over the world. And I'll go back to 2010, actually, 28, 29, 2010. I'm sure all of you recall the food price crisis then and the global land rush that followed. And in 2009, we established an initiative called the Land Matrix, tracking all these lands or all these land deals that are part of the land rush. And we established an initiative, the Land Matrix, and I will give you some of the results that are coming out now of 10 years of following all these deals globally. So I've entitled my little presentation, it's not a presentation, I'll just show you a couple of slides. Are we really in the framework of a new frontier, as we like to say? So just a couple of slides to show you where we stand with these land deals. So 10 years ago, as I said, the global land rush, and you can see here, I don't know if you see my arrow on the screen, from 2008, 2009, up to 2012, around the food price crisis, we see a huge spike in investment into land and primary agriculture. What we see now is that the spike has totally flattened. It's slowing very drastically, significantly. It's still going on, so it's continuous investment in land and agriculture out there, but much, much less than before. And I think my presentation and these slides confirm and are very complementary with what Russell just said. So a continuous, but certainly much slower investment trends into primary agriculture and in lands globally. What we do see, however, is that although it's slowing, implementation of activities and primary agriculture is increasing. So here's the slowing trend, but what you see here in gray is that around the food price crisis in 28, 29 up to 2010, there was very little implementation. So there was a lot of purchase of land, but very little production or pieces of land that go into production. Today, we see that about 60% of these pieces of land that have been acquired during that time, from 2010 until now, are being put into production. So 60% of the deals tend to go into production. This being said, very little in hectarage is being planted on all these deals. It's the dotted line here that shows you how much of the deals are going, or how much of the land that is being acquired are going into effective production. So I said slowing trend, but all the deals that have been concluded, now 60% go into production. The problem is they go in very limited production. So they've acquired 10,000 hectares, 50,000 hectares, 100,000 hectares. Some of them only use 1,000 hectares. Others use 2,000 or 3,000 hectares. And actually from the total mass that has been acquired, I mean, we turn around 35 million hectares during that time, only 20% has been put in effective production. So production very, very, very limited. And this is on the concluded deals. These are not the deals that have failed or didn't conclude, etc. So for those that are going into production, it's only about 20% of the land. So up to today, 10 years later, we speak about 5 million hectares out of the 35 million that have been acquired that are put into production. Other point is, out of those that are being put in production, they are mainly in Latin America and in Central Europe. The two continents where we would like to have seen a new frontier, Africa on the right and Asia on the left. Almost nothing has been put in production. We are very, very low rates here, about 2 or 3% only of the land acquired on the continents, and these are the continents where the most land has been acquired during that period, is being put in under effective production. So we remain very far of this real wave of investment and the new frontier that we talked about 10 years ago, and I was one of the first ones claiming that. A main reason also behind all this is the huge amount of failures, and Russell gave us already a couple of examples. They were in Zimbabwe, it's a special case. Overall, I think my slides left, but examples I can give is Madagascar, for example. There we had 52 projects, 52 land acquisition deals. Out of these 52, there's only 3 remaining. Ethiopia, just the same. More than 85% of the investments have totally failed. Other countries have just the same, especially in Africa and in Asia. So very, very low rates of success. I have no time to go into the reasons of these failures, but the number one reason that came out of all of this monitoring that we've been doing over the 10 years is financing problems. So after the food price crisis, we had the financial crisis, which lowered finance for such projects. We had a change of policies, biofuels, etc., were cancelled, so no funding there anymore. And then because of all these deals collapsing, well, private banks and investment institutions are not very keen to go out there, just as Russell has said. Who remains out there 10 years later? Who are the projects that continue? Well, these are the bigger international organizations, companies, investment funds that have the financial capacity to keep going. All the others have collapsed and have pulled back. What we do see is second and third generation of investments. So no new lands being acquired, but lands that have been acquired 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that collapsed. Well, new companies are taking over this in the second or third generation. And actually, Graham Dixie at the World Bank a couple of years ago, when he was at the World Bank, said you need 7 generations of investment before getting something sustainable and a new frontier. And maybe now we see a second and third. Maybe we need a couple more to get the benefits coming out of this investment hype since 10 years ago. So just to conclude, new frontier question mark. I was one of the first one calling for that when we started doing this tracking. Now I'm much more pessimistic. As it stands now, there's very little elements to claim there is a frontier. There has been a lot of land acquired, as you've seen from my slides. Very little has been done with it. The idea of outsourcing agriculture as a quick fix, and Russell said it again, will not work. The countries have to engage in a structural reflection on how they want to engage agriculture. And this is by promoting, indeed, large-scale investments, but also promoting small-scale agriculture with infrastructure, public services, roads, etc., so extensive services. All this has to come together. Outsourcing to a couple of companies will not lead to structural change. We see it now on these results 10 years later. So final observations. Maybe it's a good time to reflect, and this panel is perfect timing, because we see in my slides that we are going to a more significant implementation. So hopefully with the third, fourth generation, this will speed up even more. We standing in front of a commodity and a price boom apparently. So maybe this will relaunch the dynamics in agriculture, hopefully. And we have the baggage now to do better. 10 years down the road, we didn't know much. Now we've seen a couple of things. There's new policies, there's new international guidelines, etc. So we have the baggage and the elements now to do better, and hopefully we can use these opportunities to make it, to make a new frontier and to make it work for especially the countries that need the most in Africa and Asia for sure. I'll stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Vad, for that very sobering presentation. Because as we look at agriculture, especially at this time, we are actually going to what you are cautioning us on, to say, let's not look at agriculture just as a quick fix. And I think, Vad, as we move to our last two speakers for their opening remarks, I would like you, which is when we come back, to really be thinking about, to say, if you were to be placed in a room with some of the African policymakers, what are the 5 top things that you would say, guys, to actually change this a bad picture? Because we see land deals acquisition up, but the utilization is very down, particularly in the continent. How do we change that structure? And I think if you could think about really just 5 things on that, and I guess it applies to Russell. He painted a very bearish picture about the investments in Africa, and I can see the frustration on Russell because he's operating in the heart of the real economy. And Russell, I will ask you again when we come back on the second round, what are the 5 things? Because we're hoping to leave at least with some highlight on the African side. about what needs to happen. And Nico, who's a financer, is here. He is also looking for areas of investment and is participating in the continent. And I think that you mentioned that finance, which is on UVAD, is a big thing that is in there. What should Nico be thinking about in as far as the financing in the African continent? But that's the Africa reflections. We now turn our eye to the Euro area, and we will really start with Marcel. Marcel is a partner with One Planet. And Marcel, if you could just open up with your 7 minutes or so reflections onto this. You've heard from the people who are operating in the continent on the ground. Over to you, Marcel.
Thanks, Wandile. Could you please turn on my slide, my presentations? Yes, there it is. Yeah, thanks. So this session is about new investment, new parties entering the area of AgriFood, and maybe myself, I'm a good example of that. I really don't have an agricultural background. I'm a physicist, technologist, and for the last decade, I've worked for IMEC, a big R&D institute, and I'm working now for a recently established research center. Please go to the next slide. Which is called One Planet. And One Planet was established 2 years ago with a mission to create very disruptive solutions to tackle a couple of global challenges that you see here in the area of agriculture, food and health. And especially with an increasing population, there's an increasing need for healthy food, nutritional food that contribute also to the prevention of disease. And One Planet was created to especially work with industrial partners to accelerate these innovations and to create scalable applications which can have a large impact. Please go to the next slide. We focus on 3 domains: the healthy environment, healthy food, and healthy life. And they look like very different domains at first sight, but in fact this is a continuum. Healthy food, healthy environment, and healthy life go hand in hand. And at our institute, we're absolutely convinced that digital technology in combination with nano electronics are the innovations and the key to reach success. Please go to the next slide. And One Planet was founded by 3 parties, three public parties, which is IMEC. We are the world's leading organization in nanotechnology and digital technology. The Wageningen University, the world-renowned university in this domain, in combination with another university in the Netherlands, the Radboud University and Medical Center, which focus especially on preventive health and mental health. Please go to the next slide. And as I said, our toolbox are chip technology and digital technology, and this is where I come from. You can see here a wafer. This is how the core and the heart of your smartphone are being made, and the amount of functionality that you can add to such a device, and what we have achieved over the past years is just mind-boggling. And as this session is about new parties entering this field, IMEC is I think one of the organizations that you probably don't know of have heard of yet. So please go to the next slide. So IMEC is the world leading organization in nanoelectronics and digital technology. We really have driven the semiconductor roadmap. So all the technology that you're using today to create also this virtual conference is based on IMEC technology. But you'll never see our name on the technology that you're using, because we are very much in the front of this innovation. At the moment, we have more than 5,000 highly skilled employees, and we work together with more than 500 industrial partners. And these are all big and small companies from the high-tech industry, but they all join together in our open innovation programs, and we're now seeking, for instance, how this successful business model, because we are already there for 35 years and we have grown from literally a spin-off from the university in Leuven to now this institute with more than 600 million turnover. How similar can we use similar business models that we have used so far? Can that also be successful in agriculture? Please go to the next slide. And within One Planet, we focus now on two domains. Can we start to understand the relationship between food and health and well-being? Especially, we start to understand that, for instance, chronic inflammation in the guts leads to all kinds of chronic diseases later on. And how can nanotechnology help to understand this very complex interaction? On the other side, we're also looking at how can we use technology, especially for controlled growing, making use of as efficiently possible of the natural resources, and really start to understand for instance, the plant physiology much better using all kinds of technology. Please go to the next slide. So One Planet, is now up and running for 2 years, but we're standing literally on the shoulders of giants, with have this long history. And within these 2 years, we've already created, I think, very disruptive new technology. So in the sense of new digital twin models about our gut, using, you can see devices here. These are ingestible devices packed with chemical sensors that we're getting ready for human trials even to understand. But this particular technology is also being used to further understand, for instance, nutrient uptake of plants. And you see an example also where we're investigating how also this technology can be seamlessly integrated in our daily life. For instance, in our bathroom, in the toilet, for instance, to assess hydration. And again, now moving to the food and the environment, there are also a very new technology. We are looking at, for instance, fruit quality. Can we assess plagues and defects earlier using technology that for instance, even with other techniques or like RGB cameras cannot be disclosed or seen yet. And that slowly you see this whole continuum from healthy life towards healthy environment, where we have also created devices that get directly feedback from the plants and even to assess, for instance, the impact of agricultural activities on the environment. And so this is how I will also create this continuum in application, but also in technology. The building blocks, the general building blocks that coming also from different industry. We tailor them and such that can be also, we think, can be very disrupted also in this field. So thank you for this, and I'm happy also to continue with the Q&A session.
Thank you so very much, Marcel, for that. Very empowering, because technology will obviously be one of the key things that will help us in Africa to really leapfrog some of the challenges that we are faced. Marcel, we're going to switch now the gears a little bit and really allow Ronaldo Cleveland to come in. And Ronaldo, I mean, the space that you are in, you're working for the European Center for Finance, for Alternative Finance. And you heard about the challenges of financing. They came out from Nico at the start. John highlighted some of the areas that needs financing in South Africa and the continent at large. And they came ever more striking on Russell's difficulties that he explained. Likewise with VAD in there. So I would like just to hear from you your experiences in the Euro area, but also if you can, in some of the points, you can even reflect on those challenges that are happening in Africa. On how do you think some lessons from Europe that could be applicable to the African continent and Asia in those areas that will face some bit of difficulties. Over to you, Ronald.
Okay, thank you, Wandile. Yes, I will try to reflect a bit to my fellow speakers, indeed. But before I do that, I'd like to start with when we think about finance, and I've heard this also from the previous speakers, we either think that financing needs to come from either from a bank or it needs to come from private equity or venture capital. But the problem with these types of financing is that they're all looking for maximizing the financial returns. Of course, we all talk about sustainable finance and it needs to be used for common good. But in the end, a financial institution, either it's a bank or it is a private equity organization, they need to maximize profit for their stakeholders. Nothing wrong with that, because that's how we want to develop the financial system. But what I'd like to talk about is the industry of alternative finance, and specifically even more community finance. And I can come back to community finance a bit later. But the alternative finance industry, this is an industry that has been developed very rapidly in the last decade, not only in Europe, but all over the continent. It's an industry raising up to $300 billion every year in investments for all types of SMEs, startups, but also all other types of agricultural investments, for example. And if we focus just on Europe, because Europe is my research area where I know much more about, more than 20 billion euro is invested there or is raised by organizations by alternative finance every year already. So it's a huge industry, of course, but it's still growing. So it's growing by 20, 30, 40% each year. And more different types of alternative finance also are being introduced. And if we talk about financing, for the next step for alternative finance is alternative ownership. We have to rethink ownership models. And I know in agriculture, this is a very sensitive topic, ownership of land. But I was asked also to reflect and to give a bit of feedback of what we see on the continent. We see in Europe what is happening in the agriculture industry. And one of the fascinating models that I see is that there is a huge interest for private individuals, so not banks, private equity, or other investment or family funds, but from private individuals to invest in ownership of land. And of course, they cannot do that one by one, so they do that in a collective way. This can be done on a micro scale, where people are investing in local farmland in their own area to make sure that the food production is done on a sustainable way. This can also be done on a larger scale. So one example is that in the Netherlands currently we have one initiative opening up a cooperative trying to raise 18 billion euro to buy agricultural land in the Netherlands, 300,000 hectares. That's 10% of all the land used for agriculture in the Netherlands. To buy from, so the money comes from individuals raising the money to buy the land and to make use for sustainable uses of the land. And they can do that because they don't want to have a high financial return on their investment. And if we reflect to Russell, for example, this investment is very valuable for the people. So they don't get any return, financial return on their savings currently in the bank. So if they put this money in the land, it's automatic. They don't even need to have a high financial return on the short term, because the land value will increase in the next few decades. And also they don't have to sell it really quickly. But because they don't want to have a high financial return on the short term, it's also cheaper for farmers to use that land. So therefore, different food production methods become possible for creating more sustainable food production, for example, or shorter cycles for more local food production, for example. It can be doesn't have to scale up too much. Another model that we see now, as a researcher, I'm fascinated with that, is that we've seen these kind of multiple stakeholder or multiple business models where food production, energy production, for example, are being combined. Where we see innovations in combining different types of businesses in one organization to make it possible to have higher returns in the end. And what also, and I reflect back to John, opening statement about inclusiveness, is if you make sure that local people can invest, but also own their local community food production, you see there is much more inclusive ownership, inclusive wealth distribution also within a community, because it's not just the farmer who is getting paid, and it's not just the landowner who's getting the profits, but it's the full community around it who can contribute, but also can benefit in the end from the production. If I go back to Ward, so I'm really fascinated with your presentation, and also to see about the land usage, and that's so much of these lands are being bought, but not a lot of them are being used, and especially because they are needing follow-up investments. And my question back to Ward would be, if this third or fourth generations investments, if this will be done by a more connected crowd, so not an outside investor from China, for example, but it will be more a crowd that is, or a community that's much more connected with that area or with a type of food production, would that give additional possibilities for success, so that they will focus more about not just a financial return on the short term, but they also want to focus on more eco-friendly development of the land use, or eco-friendly production in general. One last point I'd like to make, and that's more indeed zooming out again on a European scale. In Europe, we have a lot of budget from the European Commission supporting agricultural use and increase the quality of the use. What we've currently seen, and that's not just in the agriculture industry, but this is just on the economy in general, is that there is a big problem for the European Commission to be able to distribute all these funds from the European Investment Bank, from the European investment funds, to real world projects, because the distribution of these funds are normally done through banks or through fund investments in venture capital firms. But we see there is a lack of connection between the banks financing, the venture capital financing, to these real world SMEs, these real world projects. And what we've seen now in the last few years, just the last 1-2 years, and in the plans it's being implemented much more for the next 5 years, is that alternative finance platforms, because they have technology to evaluate the risk models of these SMEs, of these projects, much better than the traditional banks, traditional venture capital firms, is that these alternative finance platforms are being used as a distribution channel for these European funds. And if you think that for the next 7 years, 2021, 2027, there is 95.5 billion euro available in funds from the European Commission to support the agricultural industry. And you know that these alternative finance platforms will be used, at least partly, but I think that will grow rapidly, to distribute the funds to these individual projects, to these individual companies. You will see that this way of financing will grow rapidly in the next decade. And I think that also is important because these alternative finance intermediaries, platforms, are much more connected with these projects on the ground. They know exactly what's happening, and they need to have a certain type of capital. Either it is equity, or it is a subordinated loan, or sometimes it's just a guarantee to attract additional funding, either from a local community or crowd, but also from bank financing. So we see much more blended finance solutions there, but the big trigger will be these almost 100 billion of euro that's available in these European structural funds. That's my opening statement. That's what I would like to give the floor back to you, John or Wandile. I hope this will trigger a bit of the discussion for the rest of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Ronald. It will, and we're going to get back to you. We're also trying to launch blended finance models in South Africa, especially development, and our colleague Theo Bos has been very involved in developing that with governments and with our banking sector, etc. So obviously we're also looking at new models, even syndication models of finance and so on developing. So there's a big challenge around financing, and especially development finance in Africa and South Africa. When you talk about 100 billion euros, that's a lot of money. And is that just for European investment, or are you looking at other investment into Africa too? Because I think we need some partnerships. If I see what's happening in Europe and what we need in Africa, and perhaps that's something that we need to explore with VART. Even though the projects don't seem to be working, we've got to then look at the technology. I'm so enthralled with the technology part of it. Being a scientist, a natural scientist myself, in training at least, and the opportunity, the possibilities that it brings. But I see that we also have some questions already in the questions and answers column. I'm going to take those first while Russell, you and Vart are thinking of the top 5 issues that Wandile asked you. I'm going to still give you an opportunity for those, but let's just take some of the questions in the Q&A. I don't want to miss them. I think the first one is directed towards Marcel and the question is IMEC or One Planet also a kind of gateway for other big industries to enter the agribusiness environment? And then also if I can add to that, and you can answer it at the same time, is the availability of that technology into the African or South African agricultural systems. I still feel that there's a huge opportunity. And I mentioned the technology right in the beginning because I think technology is where the big game or deal breaker is for our future food systems. I think Russell also alluded to that with the increase in yields, etc., that we're seeing. So it doesn't become a land issue so much as it becomes a technology issue and a technology availability issue and a technology pricing issue. So Marcel, if you can take that question first, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot for all these questions. So about the first one, yes, so especially One Planet's was established to link those two industries, the high-tech industry and the AgTech. And in practice, how does this work? We work together with the Wageningen University, for instance, that really can help us define, what are the really big challenges in this field. From a technology point of view, you don't have any answer, and then that is something that I've looked into in the past 2 years, and then together with our IMEC experts, and once they're going to interact and start to know each other's world, you see this new, this really brilliant ideas. Just they appear. One day they come into existence, and now you see already a couple of examples after these 2 years, and by doing so, we also open the door to our industrial network behind us, and now also we see especially companies coming from, for instance, the automotive industry, or in this case also the water industry, especially from the semiconductor industry. And, for instance, in a clean room that we're employing in Leuven, you need extremely clean water. Well, how can this technology also be employed, for instance, in for instance, horticulture or glass houses? That sort of translations I'm trying to make, on a daily basis right now. And to answer your second question, also on the availability of technology, that's always so. Let me answer to this. What has worked really well in the semiconductor? We created these building blocks, these technology building blocks that we license and that our partners involve or use in their products. A difference in this particular area is that is not enough. You need to show that the technology is working, is functioning in a harsh environment, and also bring values, for instance, to the growers, than also other companies. So how we do this, how we then now bridge that technology gap, because it's clear, we are at the forefront of innovation, but we're not academia. We really want to bring this technology to higher. So at the moment we're engaging also with small and medium enterprises that locally that are very flexible in creating these prototypes, and as such also we have a means also to scale up. So we create the first of a kind prototypes, even towards a system. We show that it works, it brings added value. But then we have also already a couple of companies in our network, in the supply chain, that then can take this up. Bring this to to scalable solution, and then it starts to also enter the market. I can give you a great example of this on water quality, but that's something from for a different moment. John, you're still mute.
Apologies, thank you. There's another question which sort of relates to the technology issue, and that is on the skills part of it. So in many countries, investments in the more high-tech production systems also fail, or as we've seen in Africa, the examples that Wout gave, due to the limited investment in human capital. Because if you have this high-tech, you need high skills to manage the high-tech in the process. And the question then is to investors. Does this require investment in local TVET colleges and universities to train practical managers? Is this sort of a KPI for investors? Perhaps the finance guys, Ronald and Nico, must answer this. When you're looking at investment, are you also, and especially in high tech, are you also looking at the skills levels and are investors looking at the skills levels? Russell, you could also come in on this one. Thank you. John,
yes, I'm going to answer by means of an example. and we have burnt our fingers in the past where we place the emphasis too much on just one element of an investment. We are currently looking at, we're taking part in a program which is a joint effort between ourselves and one of the universities in South Africa, as well as the Department of Agriculture in that specific project. And the prerequisite for that was specifically education and training to go hand in hand with what we want to achieve. I think even with a relatively low level of technology, agriculture is specialized, and you sit with numerous variables. So training, and training is not just then limited to the technology side of it. You have to have a comprehensive training approach to it, where the understanding of markets is also included in how you look at training. So yes, at least from a banking perspective, and when I'm answering that from a banking perspective, I'm answering from a lending perspective and not from an investment perspective. If we go into lending arrangements, specifically where there are new entrants into a system, it is a prerequisite that we focus on the human capital side of it as well.
Bart, you or Ronald want to respond? Russell?
Yes, always. So first of all, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. So the first time, or the first part of it, we brought technology in from Italy to do our leveling of our soya meal in the factory. And we ended not getting support and not training locally. We end up working with a garage door remote. So different technologies, obviously, in the piggery side, the genetic side, you can implement it very quickly. So it's horses for courses, and it needs to be able to do it. One problem that we do have is obviously some labor laws as well. So you can't just train people from outside. You need to do it inside, and there's obviously labor issues on that. There's a lot of complexity around that side as well.
Keep forgetting the mute button. Here's another question also from Woody Myers, and perhaps also to Nico or to Russell. The new sustainability requirements in EU make trade difficult. Will the export to China with lower standards have a negative effect on the need to create a sustainable production system in Africa? I think it is common knowledge, and Nico explained that, and as did Russell, that our trade with China is growing. We have some problems from time to time like now, but we also have new opportunities with the Lemon Protocol just being signed. Perhaps just some thoughts from your side, Nico, Russell?
John, thanks. Yeah, I think the answer is yes and no. One could argue that there could be potential negative impact on sustainable production if China suddenly, closes up or have sufficient product that South Africa in specific, then need to redirect their product back again to other markets, and then you could potentially sit with the issue. Having said that, though, I do think that the need or the growth in China and the need for agricultural product into China is quite significant, and it would not cease in a short to medium term. So depending on what product and value chain you're in, I would think it would not have a negative impact, but it could potentially, if China ends up with the sufficient either self-production, which I doubt would be in some of the cases be applicable, or then getting product from somewhere else in the world, that you could potentially sit with that kind of.
Okay.
Sure.
Just a strange thing is always about what is the real goals in this thing. In Africa, the average protein intake is 62 grams, whereby in Netherlands it's 107 grams per protein part or grams per day. And we're sitting with this population explosion in Africa that's going to happen. I think we don't worry about too much exports. Yes, it's obviously high-end, intensive farming practices. And unfortunately, the whole thing, and I think the last time I was on a stage, it was down in Madagascar 10 years ago. And that was a little bit of a interesting one. But so I do think that we need to focus on what Africa needs. Obviously, South Africa is one part of it, and we're definitely not Zimbabwe, Mozambique, or any of the other. And yeah, so I mean, maybe we should get our goals right. The exports will happen, and the protocols and all the soft issues on sustainability, while people are only 40 grams per day under the water level.
Sure. I think on that point, we should go to the questions that Wandile posed just now to Vart. On those 5 issues. Your presentation was extremely interesting, and it raises a lot of questions actually. And have we been going down the right path? And what are we missing? And where should we be going? I think those are the questions that you are also suffering with or being frustrated with. But give us a sense of how do we do things a bit differently, or quite a lot differently in Africa. If you want system change, you've got to change faster than the system around you is changing. And that puts a lot of pressure on Africa going forward in terms of its food security and its food systems. Just some thoughts on your side.
Is it first Vart?
Go ahead, Russell. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Russell.
Russell, you're muted.
No, but you go first. I want to hear what you say.
Okay. Thanks. First of all, these are my 5 points, and I think we don't even need 5. My first one is African countries, and I'm speaking African, but Asian as well. I think Latin America and other regions have a step forward there, but especially in Africa, we need comprehensive and integrated agriculture and land policies. These quick fixes of calling up during the rush of land have not worked. We see it. Why? Because these investors with good intentions, and there's no criticism about these, are coming there without policies, without roles and responsibilities for nobody, etc. It's not going to work. It's agriculture and long term. I think all the speakers here have said it. It's a long-term investment. We need something structured to play in with, and this is the policy. And when I say agriculture policy, it does not have to be state-led or whatever. It is the roles and responsibilities of all the actors, which include the state, which include the investors, which include research, includes everybody out there, have to be clear and set to the fore for all farmers out there, large, small, medium, etc., etc. Second one is secure institutions. Without secure institutions, we're not gonna go far. And one of the first institutions that has to be secured is your land rights. Without that, we're not gonna have investments either. Every finance institution will tell you that. I think Russell has given the example of Zimbabwe. It's the same story there. Secondly, it is public infrastructure. The state has a role. If your infrastructure, if your road structures are not working, if your whatever public infrastructures out there, extension services are not there, we're not going to go far. I visited the South African farmers in Congo several times. They were struggling in the middle of the forest. No roads, no access, no support services. They needed a sample of a disease, couldn't get it to a lab, couldn't get it because there's no support services. If this public infrastructure is not there to support, it will become very, very difficult. And with all this in place, automatically you will get this investment. You will get the finance people out there. You will get the investment funds. You will get alternative funding. You will get, it will start to flow automatically, I think. And then lastly, my fifth point is think locally, and I strongly support what Russell said. We need to be locally focused, inclusive. The local actors and the local the trigger down effects to local development has to be looked at first. Going into a country just for trade or for export, it will work. It will be a short-term exercise, but it will not lead to the structural change and the frontiers we need for development on the continent.
All right. No, I totally, actually, I agree 100% with you. I mean, and actually there's only one, and that's a good rule of law. If property rights, and really a question that I've asked myself for the past 10 years, and I think I've got a little bit of an answer, but not enough time, is why did the Industrial Revolution take place in England and not somewhere else? That was definitely the answer was property rights or individual IP. And that created the whole Industrial Revolution. And there's obviously there's a lot, don't take me just on that one sentence. I can explain to you maybe later on. But so the point here is, what is a fertile soil that Africa needs? And it needs a law system where you can multi-generation farm, because it's an infrastructure play. It stays an infrastructure play over multi-generations. Why would I build a dam on a piece of land? And I flew over KwaZulu-Natal, and one morning, and the sun was coming up, and you couldn't see any dams. When I flew back the afternoon, and I was sitting on the left side of a plane, I saw the Free State, which is a flat place, and there was dams built. The one didn't have property rights, the other one did. And that's as simple as that. You will not, so human nature is human nature. I will not build a dam if it's not my dam. And you need irrigation to take the volatility out of agriculture, otherwise you bug it. And that's the long and the short of it. If Africa can only get that right and understand that human nature is all over the place the same, I will not work on somebody else's behalf. And we've tried that all over the world. My son and I fight still today about socialism and all that kind of thing. Obviously, I'm an Austrian school guy. For me as an agricultural investor, the law needs to be clear. It needs to be long-term, because it's not a short-term game. I mean, I can ask you, where did capital originate from? That's another question that I pondered. And it's not money. Where did capital originate from? So, and that is through conscious labor. It's not through labor. It's through conscious labor. And how do you enter into conscious labor? And agriculture gives you the opportunity to do that. From my point of view, agriculture is, the government needs to get out of the way with all kinds of wonderful mentorship stories. If we have property rights, all the banks will finance us. We don't have a problem. They've got security. No brainer. But what we're trying to do in South Africa is to take our thumb and hit it with a hammer. Try to revert the property rights into some wonderful. I mean, Ethiopia's got 96 different property rights things. I mean, Europe started out as through this whole serfdom. Where did the world come from? I mean, it came from serfs. And they ended up in property. Now Europeans want to almost give it, no, that system that made us rich is not the right system. We need to look at another system. I can't see the logic. Sorry.
No, Russell, very good point. But on a South Africa story, Russell, we are not going back in South Africa. Folks joining us from other parts of the world. We are just having a robust discussion about the state of society, but we are managing the things well.
I just want to find out what is the goal. I mean, we need to feed people, and that should be the goal. We need to bring the welfare of all people up sooner than later. What system proven over the past 300 years to be the best system to do that? Why do you want to go and change something that worked? Because I don't know, because what? Because we know.
100%, Russell. We're trying to get those areas that are not productive in South Africa to be productive and have an inclusive path. But that requires a broader participation of a wider society. But Russell,
I mean, it's not about it's about you look at Transkei. Go and look at Google Earth, and you will see on the Transkei, you will see the map. Read chapter 8 of Why Nations Fail. I mean, that is a perfect chapter to read. And but we want to try to re-establish something. Give every person that's got a piece of land, the chieftain system. I think it's 500 years since there's no chiefs in Europe. So why do we want to have this dualistic economy? It's about longevity. People need to live a long life. If that's not the goal, Africa, I don't know. I mean, we want to embrace technology. We want to use antibiotics. I don't know.
100%, Russell. I think the key point is property rights. It's institutions. It's good local governance for all of those basic service deliveries, which are so crucial for farming businesses to be able to operate. I take those points, and also from VAD. But I want to bring in Ronaldo here, Russell, because there is a question that comes from one of our colleagues at Value Chain Solution, who is asking, what role do you see for value chain based data platforms to provide visibility and fact base needed to direct and de-risk the investments that you were mentioning? So within the value chain side, this is a question that is on the Q&A part of us, coming from Tanya's at Value Chain Solutions.
Okay, thank you, Vandile. I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but let's answer it a bit more widely. What we've seen is where Marshall is presenting technology inside agriculture. We've seen also new technology coming up, of course, also in the financial industry. So there is much more data to analyze at this moment. There is a lot of information from value chains that you can use to track the food production, of course, for example. And what we've seen is that fintech providers are developing much stronger and better equipped risk models to reduce the risk of investments. And when you can reduce risks, it will produce lower costs in the end for the end user. So there will be more competition, there will be better pricing for the end user. So using of these use of more data, use of data in these value chains will indeed reduce the price of capital, the cost of capital in the end for food production. And perhaps I can also add one other point, and it's not really directly related to this, but also I heard one of the other panelists, I'm not sure who was it, mentioning about getting back to local production. And what trends we've seen is that local production gets really back to a community level. Is that I gave one example that people would like to see food production more in their area. One of the trends we've seen, of course, in Europe, and I think also Marshall had one of these examples already, is even food production in cities. So we've seen much more innovation, technology, getting the food back from export, long value chains, long food production lines, getting back to local food production around the corner, in fact. And this also needs to have different types of investments, because these investments are much smaller most of the time. You see that the amount of capital needed is much more, is much smaller. Of course, it's high-tech investments, so you need to focus on more than just the food production. You also have to invest quite a lot in technology. But also you need to sometimes also have to the investment needs to come really quickly. So we've seen there are different types of financing. Sometimes it's needed to get the money there also for a couple of years instead of an investment for 50 years for traditional food investments. So that's also an interesting trend that we've seen.
Right, absolutely. Time is catching up with us. As always with these discussions, an hour and a half is never enough. So many points still to debate and so many questions to be answered. But we've got 5 minutes, and I'm going to ask each, or 6 minutes, and I'm going to ask each speaker just in a minute, last parting thought from you. And I'll start again in the order that we started with. I'll start with you. Just a minute per participant, please.
John, thanks a lot. Yeah, I think from where we sit, and again, my approach is more from a lending perspective than from a pure investment point of view. I think Russell is much more equipped to give a view of a pure investor. Having said that, there is what we see from a banking point of view, and looking at how the book is performing and growing. I tend to be a bit more optimistic around expansion in agriculture, because we see that happening in our book, at least from a lending point of view. Do you think where all the differences might come from is difference in mandate regarding investment versus and also adding to that tenure. There's a lot of stuff, and the number of 100 billion euros was mentioned. I think again, if you can get through the devil that sits in the detail as to what the mandates are regarding those kind of investments or potential investments, you can unlock quite a lot of things. Africa has not been an easy place, and Russell can definitely testament to that. We, from a banking perspective, are in 20 different African countries, and we've also have war scars on our back from a lending point of view. But we've seen quite significant growth. As a matter of fact, at this point in time, in our book, our Africa business is the one that is expanding the quickest. So and if you can go and have a look at our interim results for our results for last year. That's where we actually see significant growth. That doesn't mean to say it's all moonlight and roses. It is difficult. You just need to find the right partners to do it.
Thank you very much, Nico. Russell, closing comments from you.
1 minute. So, Nico, I totally agree. I think Africa is a place to be. Agriculture is a place to be. The big thing is obviously it's for big business that the banks play for. It's definitely, and I think we mid-size. We've got 1,100 people working for us, and we've got a dream to make it 5,000 in the next 15 years all over. So the big thing is, I don't think banks is really where the money sits. It's definitely not private equity in agri. They do not understand it. It's private wealth. It's I don't call it foreign direct investment. It's local direct investments. And you need to mobilize that, and you need to. Capitalism is a belief that tomorrow will be better than today. And if I don't have that belief, I will not put down my cash and invest in something that will take me 15, 20 years, a lifetime. And then I want to actually give my fruits to my children. And they need to be safe. And that is how you mobilize capital.
Thank you, Russell. Bart?
Yeah, thank you, John. I just wanted to come back to the initial question of the panel on the new frontiers, and also respond to Ronald's question to me on the second and third generation, on are these more connected investors? And no, what we see is not more connected investors in these big on these big deals. It's international players, and as I said, until now, not many results are coming out of there. What I do think, though, is that all this attention around agriculture and the dynamics that we're seeing now is leading to change on the ground. Tom Jane, with his work on medium-scale farmers, is showing it. There's something going on there. There's more local dynamics, and this is more domestic, related to international investments. And we're not talking about small scale. We're not talking about smallholders. We're talking about something medium, and that might be more connected, more local, but still viable. And so I think this is something good to follow, to support. But as I said, this can only be done with a strong long-term strategy and coherent and solid institutions and land rights. I'll stop it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Wart. Obviously a very important aspect as well. Marcel, closing comment?
Yeah, I think my closing comment is, one of the thoughts about, for instance, the Mayas already knew that, for instance, certain crops can even enhance each other. And also somebody said, why should we change a system that already works for 300 years? I think we have to look back even further. And for instance, especially on things like intercropping and pixel cropping, for which you need also new robots or robotica and then I think that's also a way forward to much more sustainable agriculture, where species that even that knowledge that has been known to humankind, but got to the background during all the monoculture ways of farming. I think that will return, and what the opportunities in Africa I cannot judge, of course, but I think this is a major trend in Europe now. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Marcel. Ronald, thoughts from your side? Last thoughts?
Oh, thanks you to have the final last thoughts. Oh, that's interesting. I can only echo the words of for Russell, that local direct investment. I think that's a key. That's where we will see much more wealth distribution coming up in the next 5 to 10 years. And indeed, that's a long-term investment that can be used for to continue in families. And I think also one example, we need to experiment much more with blended finance models and new types of financing structures. And that will be what we need to do in the next couple of years.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your participation too. Wandile, I'm going to give you a last chance too. Any thoughts from your side before we close?
No, just to thank everyone, John, for a very robust discussion. And I see that my old teacher, Johan van Rooyen at the Stellenbosch University, has placed a question asking where is trade going? And to that, Prof. van Rooyen, we're looking at Asia. We are also looking at the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and some of the important markets for Africa's exports. So we are thinking deeply about the trade matters. But thanks, everyone. Over to you, John.
Yeah, thank you. We had a Netland meeting this morning, and the whole trade policy of South Africa is up for review. And with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the opportunities it might create, there are so many opportunities if we can harness them correctly. And we can get alignment through the master plan with our governments on policy issues and land issues, and we can get the region going. There's a lot of opportunity. I would agree with Russell and with Nico on that. Europe is also showing us so many good ways in terms of sustainability, green planet, and the just transition, carbon neutral by 2050. These are all issues that we also have to look at as we move forward. I want to thank our panelists, each one of them, very especially for participating. I enjoyed the session tremendously. There's so much more to talk about, but I think there's a sense of optimism, there's a sense of opportunity, a sense of exploring new frontiers. Yes, we do have scars on our back, as Nico says, but we also know that we've got to remain optimistic, and we've got to look for those opportunities that are sustainable, both from a financial, economic point of view, a social point of view, and an environmental point of view. So thank you. With those closing comments, I'm going to adjourn this session, and thank you for all the participants. Thank you for the questions, and Godspeed. Thank you.